Hi, my name is Özgür Yılmaz. I am doing my doctorate in the Department of Journalism at Istanbul University. I am 28. I think that the fields of political science and communication studies have become closer to each other on many issues recently. Therefore, I will try to prove this thesis through the concepts I have determined. That's why I am recording this podcast. I hope you fun listening. Our first concept is in-betweenness. In-betweenness refers to the immediate adaptation of one's performance or identity to one's textual, social, cultural, and physical environment. Defined in this way, the concept of in-betweenness can be characterized as a powerful method that adds important insights to the understanding of discourse. In-betweenness is also related to the adaptation of the locality of the culture to the environment. In-betweenness is liminal, intermediary, interstitial, transitional, and hybrid. The concept of in-betweenness is a topic often associated with cultural studies and media studies. However, recently, the concept of in-betweenness has been seen especially in cultural texts. Cinema and photography are among the highlights of these cultural texts. Examples of the representation of in-betweenness in the cultural field are the films from Vito Veles and Does It Hurt, which are about Macedonia, which is a part of Balkans, being stuck between the Europe and Balkans dichotomy. In Turkey, which is experiencing a similar dilemma, the conflict in question has been discussed in cultural texts. In this context, the concept of in-betweenness is an important concept of intersection of political science and communication studies. Our second concept is asset communism. Asset communism is a movement that seeks to revive counterculture utopianism of the 1960s. The work Asset evokes the liberation of human consciousness from capitalism as a desirable, achievable, and enjoyable goal. Aiming to regain the lost potentials of the counterculture, this project also explores an experimental politics. In this context, acid communism is a project that seeks an alternative to the capitalist order. Mark Fisher argues that psychedelic consciousness was one of the most intensely developing forms in the 1968 period. In this period, when the consumption of hallucinogenic substances, including acid, was common, there was a correlation between experience and thought. Psychedelic consciousness criticizes and opposes the intensity of reality. Reality is one of the keywords to adapt to capitalism. This capitalist reality must be accepted despite everything. Fisher claims that drug consumption is a way to escape from this reality and that alternatives to capitalism can be created in this way. Our third concept is dependence theory. Inequality has recently been increasing in every region of the world. The global elites at the top of the class pyramids own twice as much wealth as the combined assets of the poor at the bottom of the pyramid. Since 1995, the richest 1% of the world has owned 20 times more wealth than the poorest 50%. According to Bauman, the richest 20% of the population consumes 90% of the goods produced, while this rate is 1% for the poorest 20%. It is also estimated that the world's 20 richest people have resources equal to the 1 billion poorest people. For another example, the wealth of the 3 richest billionaires in the world is greater than the combined gross national product of 600 million people living in the less developed countries. So, who are the millions living in these underdeveloped countries? One of the metrics that measures inequality between developed countries and underdeveloped countries is the Gini coefficient. According to this measurement, if income is distributed proportionally within the population, the Gini coefficient is 0. But if all income goes to a single person, the coefficient is 1. Therefore, the closer the coefficient is to 0, the less inequality, and the closer it is to 1, the greater the inequality. As can be expected, examples of countries closest to 0 are Norway, Sweden, and Germany, while countries closest to 1 are generally in Africa and Latin America. Africa is the region where inequality is most intense. So much so that, according to the data obtained with the globalization process, per capita income in Africa decreased by 20% after 1980. The same rate increased by 50% for developed countries. To give an example, the difference income level between a rich city like Seattle in the United States and Ibadan in Nigeria is 739 to 1. Then it can be said that this phenomenon of inequality between rich countries and poor countries is not a coincidence. Dependency theory is a tradition that examines the relationship between poor countries and rich countries. According to this tradition, rich countries are core countries and poor countries are peripheral countries. The theory suggests that the social and economic development of underdeveloped countries is conditioned by the core countries. In other words, the wealth of rich countries is not a coincidence. Developed countries became rich and developed because they excluded and exploited underdeveloped countries. Therefore, it can be assumed that the inequality between the first world and the third world is structural and still persists. Dependency theory expands this framework by connecting colonial pasts to today's underdevelopment and ongoing economic imbalance between countries and regions, as well as connecting the resulting dependencies to the dynamics of the historical center and periphery. Dependency comes in many different forms. Cultural, environmental, sociopolitical, and technological are some of the forms of this dependence. The process of exploitation concentrated in poor regions, especially in Africa, is called blaxploitation. This word, which is a portmanteau word, was created by combining the English words black and exploitation. Inequality exists not only between countries but also with them. The unequal distribution of wealth is one of the main characteristics of the third world. Intra-regional inequalities are also gendered. In the Africa region, women have been left in the background in economic and gender contexts. Our fourth concept is barbarism. The etymological origin of the word barbarian dates back to Homer and is used in the sense of those who chatter by speaking and an incomprehensible foreign language. During the Roman Empire, as the empire grew, the lands where barbarians lived, called Barbaricum, became borders. Therefore, in order to understand the history of the concept, it is also necessary to be aware of the borders between Central Europe and Eastern Europe. Thus, a distinction arises between us and them. It was the aim of the Roman conquerors to bring order and law to the barbarians, who were seen as a wild and uncivilized people. Thus, the concept has undergone a semantic transformation. The concept that used to indicate a people now indicates the other, which is uncivilized and waiting to be civilized. A barbarian is a person who can be understood, distinct, and defined according to the civilization he is outside of. If there is no civilization that the barbarian is trying to destroy, there is no barbarian. Therefore, the concept of barbarian occupies an important place in the construction of the other. One of the most well-known examples of the use of the concept of barbarism in Western-centered thought is the slogan, either socialism or barbarism, put forward by Rosa Luxemburg. The purpose of this slogan is to make a distinction between socialism and what is rational and humanistic, and between barbarism and what is irrational and savage. The main point that concerns the concept of barbarian in the field of communication studies is the issue of representation. The concept operates as a device of stereotyping and marginalization. For example, studies conducted for years in the Canadian newspaper The Globe and Mail examined the Muslim representation of the West. In the mainstream media, especially Muslim youth are presented as enemies within the nation state. While these enemies are described as people trying to destroy the nation, they are described as beings that need to be disciplined. In short, these people are coded as barbarians. Representations are important factors in the construction of meaning. Representations, which are the founding elements of meaning, do not emerge as a result of events, but are constructed. Representations, which cannot be considered separately from culture and cultural products, are the elements that enable the meaning to have an impact among the recipients. In this context, representations with ideological content are produced through the media.